death. Kyoshi, you are the Avatar. Oh my god, what just happened? She's the Avatar. What? How could a 7-foot lady with big feet be the Avatar? So as many of you know, Kyoshi is the Avatar known for not giving one flippity-doo when it comes to bad guys. In the original show, she's known to confessing to murder, and that's a pretty heavy first impression on audiences of all ages. So, today, I wanted to read every single death scene in The Rise of Kyoshi, because I think it's extremely provoking and tells a lot about her character development in general. And of course, if you have not read the book yet, this is the official spoiler warning. I am going to be reading excerpts straight from the book. So if you have not read it and you plan on doing that, go do that. But if you want more Kyoshi content and can't be bothered with a full novel that is 400 plus pages, this is a good video for you. For some quick background, Kyoshi grew up as a peasant and had no clue she was the Avatar. And the sages had already announced the Avatar to another character named Yun, and this was because of similarities they saw with Yun with the previous Avatar, Kuruk. And you know what? Thinking about it, figuring out who the Avatar is pretty hard considering there's so many kids to go through, and it's like sometimes methods work, sometimes methods don't work, sometimes things can be lucky. It's a crazy world out there, you know? But anyways, this book follows her self-discovery and is more of a heart-wrenching revenge tale that just beats you up a little bit, but in a good way, and honestly, it's just god tier. So let's get right into this. Kyoshi and Yun were looking each other in the eye when it happened, when she saw Yun's spirit break inside him. He had been lying to her with his body and his smile and his words this whole time. He thought it was him. He never once entertained the notion that it might not be him. Any kindness and warmth he'd shown Kyoshi since the iceberg hadn't been signs of his acceptance. They'd been layers of armor that he'd furiously assembled to protect himself. Piece by piece, Kyoshi saw that the only Yun she'd ever known, the boy who was the Avatar, slow and flake into nothingness. His mantle had been stripped from his shoulders, and the shape underneath were merely wind. He let go of her. Jianshu was on top of them in a flash. He sliced out the branch of slime with a sharp, precise little wall, and using the care of his own 2 hands, dragged Kyoshi away to safety. Just Kyoshi. He laid her on the ground and turned around, but it was too late. The spirit slime reared into the air between them and Yun, a snake guarding its prey. The eyeball in the tunnel swelled with fury. You call me forth, ask for my boon, and then assault me. Its roar nearly shattered the bones of Kyoshi's ears. Yun, she tried to shout. Run. Fight. Save yourself. The Avatar. It never meant anything. Jiansu took an earthbending stance, cautiously settling his feet the way a swordsman might slowly go for his blade. I couldn't risk you taking your revenge on Kuruk's reincarnation. You had your blood, Father Glowworm. Your price has been paid. I'm raising it. Instead of attacking the 2 of them, the tendril wrapped around Young from neck to hip. His face was pale as clay. He wouldn't move his limbs. Every fear Kyoshi had of taking from him, what he treasured most, had come to pass in a thundering instant. There was only one more thing left for him to lose. No, Kyoshi stopped. Please, no. The spirit pulled, and Yun flew backward into the tunnel, disappearing into darkness. As Jiansu punched his fist upward to seal the passage shut once more with solid mountain, Kyoshi found her voice again, and she screamed pure fire. Kelsang felt Kyoshi tremble through her hand on his back, felt her fear. He ignored his own pain and drew up to his full height. You will have nothing to do with Kyoshi for the remainder of your life, he said. You are no longer fit to serve the Avatar. The cut landed deep on Jiansu. Where will you go? He roared, frenzied and frothing. Where? The air temples? The abbots will hand her back to me before you can even finish telling her story. Have you forgotten how far you've fallen from grace with them? Didn't Tagaka jog your memory? Kelsang tensed into a solid carving of himself. The grain of his staff squeaked from how tightly he held it. I know everyone in the 4 nations who could possibly help you, Jiansu said. I put out that message, and every lawman, every sage, every official will be tripping over their own feet to hunt you down on my behalf. Being the Avatar will not protect her from me. Kyoshi, run! Kelsang shouted. He pushed her away and leaped at Jiansu, bringing his staff down to create a gale of wind. Jiansu brought Earth up to meet him, but they weren't fighting the same fight. Kelsang meant to blast his friend away, to knock the madness out of him, to overwhelm him with the least amount of harm done, in the way of all air nomads. Jiansu shaved off a razor of flint no longer than an inch sharp, and thin enough to pass through the wind without resistance, and slice at where his victim was exposed and vulnerable. A spurt of blood came from the side of Kelsang's neck, from a finger-length cut so clean and precise, it was almost elegant. Jiansu's expression flickered with sadness that was deeper and truer than what he'd given to Yun, as he watched his friend fall. Kelsang collapsed to the ground, and his head bouncing lifelessly off the hard-packed earth. Those were the last things Kyoshi saw before the white glow behind her eyes took over her entire being. She rose into the air, not with dust lifting, but a whirling vortex that sucked her higher into the sky. Zhu screamed and dangled from her grip. The tornado she rode blew the Daofai back. From this distance, they were so tiny and pathetic and human. Kyoshi extended her free hand, palm upward, and the stalks of rice around Shu's men set ablaze. She curled her fingers closer together, and the flames, accelerated by her winds, hemmed them in. Many of the outlaws shrieked and threw themselves on the ground, rolling out to put the fires that had caught on their clothes. Kyoshi looked down the length of her arm at Shu. He shielded his eyes from hers, her inner light too harsh to take in. His mouth gaped open and shut like a fish. The air was moving too fast for him to breathe. "You forget, Shu," she said in a legion of voices synchronized in the eye of the storm. "There is always someone who stands above you in judgment." It was possible that other, more powerful people spoke through her in this moment. There was a chance she was simply a puppet, beholden to their collective will. But an unassailable feeling of control told her that it wasn't true. The voices could lend her insight, eloquence, but they could not take over. Many of them seemed to disapprove of what she was doing. Let them, Kyoshi thought. She was in command. She brought Shu's face closer to hers now. "What will you do now?" she asked, knowing that your every step will have consequences. She needn't have asked. Behind the terror of Shu's eyes, there was a stronger, deeper outrage. His soul lacked any porousness, and the chance she so generously provided had washed off like a rain of lacquer. How dare she? Was the only thought running through his head. How dare she? Consequences were for his victims. He was the man who did whatever his power let him. Shu mistook her analyzing frown for a lapse in her guard and spat a gout of flame in her face. So he's a firebender, she thought, as she diverted the flame off to the side with a tilt of her head. A shame for him that he'd given away his intentions so clearly, and that Dragon's Breath was the first act of firebending Kyoshi had ever performed. She wasn't as surprised as he'd expect her to be. Both Laoge and Jiansu were right in some measure. Short-sighted men like Tae and Shu were parasites who gnawed at the very structure they exploited for power and survival. They were blind to the fact that they existed not through their own merits, but due to the warped form of charity the world had decided to give them. And Shu had exhausted his. Kyoshi was the only thing holding him up. She opened her hand and watched him fall. She literally she's like stories into the air, and she just drops this man to his death. Crazy stuff. They walked down the street in high spirits. Kyoshi pulled one of her fans out and levitated a pebble. She could bend perfectly with her new gloves. "If only it were this easy to find shoes that fit," she grumbled. "It's better than being short and skinny," Lake said morosely. "If I was your size, I'd be ruling my own nation by now." Ranji laughed and squeezed his arm. "Aw, cheer up, Lake," she said. She prodded his bicep, working her way higher. "You'll fill out soon. You have good bone structure." Lake turned a deeper red than the face paint they wore on the raid. "Cut it out," he said. "It's not funny when—" Ranji had suddenly yanked him down by the arm. Her knees dragged in the dirt. It was as if her entire body had gone limp. "What?" she mumbled, her eyelids beating like insect wings. Lake yelped again and swatted the small of his back. As he spun in place, Kyoshi saw a tuft of down sticking out of him. The fletching of a dart. She instinctively brought her hands in front of her face and her sharp metal planks bouncing off her bracers. But the back of her neck was uncovered, and a stinging burn landed on her skin there. The sensation of liquid spread over her body. Poison, her mind screamed, as her muscles went slack. Lake tried to ready a stone to hurl at their attackers, but it fell out of his hands and rolled to the ground. He and Kyoshi collapsed on their faces like the Daofai who had been slashed by the seer Shu. It was different from the incense Jiansu had drugged her with. She could still see and think, but the poison was having different reactions on her friends. Ranji seemed barely conscious, and Lake began to gag and choke. Feet ran over to them. Pairs of hands quickly grabbed Ranji and dragged her away. Just Ranji. Kyoshi tried to shout and scream, but the poison had its strongest grip on her neck, where it had first entered her body. Her lungs forced out, but her voice box added no sound. She could see Leg. His face turned red and puffy. He clenched at his swelling throat. He was having some kind of reaction. He couldn't breathe. Tears streamed down Kyoshi's face as she lay inches away, helpless, unable to save another boy from Jianshu's venoms. The dust turned muddy in her eyes. It was nearly half an hour before she could crawl over to Lake and check for a heartbeat that wasn't there. That death scene made me cry when I first read it for the first time when the book came out. Crazy. The boy she loved had been replaced by a hollow scaffolding, wind blowing through its gaps. The nearby customers, who so far tolerated her strangeness, recoiled from Yun like he was a rotting corpse. Scraping chairs over the floor in their haste to create distance, they couldn't bear to be near him. Yun noticed the bullet on the table. Its presence filled him with delight, and his face lit up as if he'd seen the object before. He reached over and slowly plucked the stone free, while Kyoshi and Jiansu were still fighting for control over it, tearing the rock from the combined bending grip of the Great Master and the Earth Avatar. To Kyoshi, it felt like he'd ripped a hole in empty space, removed the moon from the sky itself. She could almost hear the sucking noise as the bullet left her in Jiansu's grasp. Still, without words, Yun held the rock out, making sure Kyoshi and Jiansu could both see it. Then, he cupped that hand to Jiansu's chest. Jiansu's eyes bulged. Kyoshi felt his earthbending flare outward and was forced to compensate. Yun gently put his other hand, still stained with black ink, to Jiansu's back. After another second passed, he showed them what had traveled between his palms. The stone, now covered in blood. Yun didn't wait for Jiansu to finish dying. He winked at Kyoshi and turned to leave. Jiansu teetered in his seat, gagging on blood, a dark red patch spreading from the tunnel in his chest. The waiter screamed. I think that was the most chilling way to kill a person was the last death scene where Yun kills Jiansu. And it kind of gave me those vibes when Zahir literally sucked the oxygen out of the Earth Queen's body and you watched her die. Literally, Yun, it was like literally shooting somebody with earthbending, but slowly putting it through your chest, through your heart. It's just so crazy to think about. But yeah, that was me reading death excerpts from the Rise of Kyoshi. So if you enjoyed this video, if you enjoyed these readings, please leave the video a like. And if you didn't, go watch another video and just go do your own thing. You don't have to leave a dislike or anything. And I hope you guys enjoyed this, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.